travel all over the countryside. Ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands, travel all over the countryside. Ask the Leyland Brothers.
Ask the Leyland Brothers has been running on Australian television for the past 12 years. Mike and Mal produced 153 episodes, introducing the great Australian continent to many of us for the first time. That's a pretty impressive track record for two young Newcastle blokes who started television at the ground floor. In many ways, the success of the Leyland Brothers runs parallel with the development of the once fledgling industry.
People see us as the guy next door, they see us as being like them. They look at what we do, they think we could do that, and I think that works because they say, well, they're not actors, they're just real people.
Very average.
Yeah. And because we're average, I think they can relate. I mean, if they sit there and look at someone like an American actor, they're all teeth and everything else, they say, oh, look at that guy, he doesn't look real to them. But they look at us and they just say, oh, they're just ordinary guys from next door. They go out to the desert, why can't we do that?
It all started when they were both in their late teens. They took some holidays, a small boat and a camera, and produced their first documentary, Down the Darling. That was back in 1963. Surviving that adventure called for ingenuity, like repairing broken propellers with blades formed from tin cans.
Actually, that was made while I was still at Channel 3 shooting news. We had a holiday in 1963, took a month off and went down the Darling River. And it was, you had...
I was working with
the paper and got sacked.
Yeah. Well, it took 10 weeks, you see, so having a month's holiday wasn't much good to me. So when I came back, I then joined Mike at Channel 3.
Since then, they've visited nearly every place of interest in Australia. They were the first to cross the continent from east to west by land. Their pictures have captured events not usually accessible, like the now famous bouncing stones.
They certainly seem to bounce all right.
How important has it been for Australians to get to see their own country through your programs?
Well, that's been part of its success, I think, because people are interested in Australia and we've been discovering parts of Australia ourselves, and it's interesting to look now at those places we had a lot of adventures. Western Arnhem Land, as we always used to call it, is now Kakadu National Park, and all the places that Crocodile Dundee was shot in were all the places that we used to knock around in the 70s with our cameras and film them. So, and that's happened in a lot of cases.
The Leylands have now relocated their entire television production studio to this site on the Pacific Highway near Tea Gardens. From here, they continue to produce television documentaries, often using the archive of material collected over their long careers. The film cameras have given way to the latest video technology. Their studio has 36,000 watts of lighting and houses the set for a pilot quiz show, which could be seen sometime next year.
We probably will change some of the style of programs. We are looking at doing a children's drama, which we'd shoot here. We're looking at this program that you're looking at here, where we're standing in a set.
This set, in fact, is part of a whole new program concept that we're developing at the moment. But it's all under wraps. We can't say too much about it.
But there's plenty of activity outside the studio too, on the 40-hectare site. Mike and Mal are pouring millions of dollars into an innovative tourist park project, which will be called Leyland Brothers World. Stage 1 will consist of a 5-hectare artificial lake. Around that lake runs a 1.6-kilometre railway line with a replica Queensland Canefields train. Riding on that train, you soon get the feeling that this is as much fun as it is business. The park has a strong emphasis on education, with a campsite for school groups, and a delightful walking trail through a natural mangrove swamp on the property.
Well, our motto is going to be Discover Australia at Leyland Brothers World, and that's what we think we're doing. We're building a representation of all those things that we like about Australia, all the places we've been and seen, And we're also
Plans are also on the drawing board for a replica of Ayers Rock, which will be the feature attraction at the park's front entrance. Perhaps the most prized acquisition so far, however, is the full-scale replica of the Bark Wind Rose. The $1.25 million model was the centrepiece of the First State 88 exhibition in Sydney. The Leyland Brothers bought it and transported it in bits to the tea garden site, complete with some amazing fixtures.
See that?
Oh, oh, isn't that terrific? Where was that? On the deck?
On the dock, yeah.
On the dock.
Taxidermy job.
So now if you want to ask the Leyland Brothers, you've got a choice. Either watch them on TV, or from March next year, head to tea gardens and ask them yourself.
Travel all over the countryside. Ask the Leyland Brothers.
Striking coal mine workers gathered at Branxton's Miller Park this morning to discuss their concerns. Their strike began at midnight over the sacking on Friday of 9 Miners' Federation members from the Mount Thorley coal loader. The sacked men had been ordered to return to work, but had defied the Coal Industry Tribunal order. The Mount Thorley coal loader management wants the Federation members to work a 7-day roster, in accordance with a recent tribunal decision on new conditions. But the Miners' Federation says its members at the coal loader will be disadvantaged compared with FEDFA and Collieries Staff Association members. Striking coal mine workers are expected to remain out until at least Thursday, with the National Liaison Committee meeting tomorrow to consider today's resolutions. And the Miners' Federation hopes the Coal Industry Tribunal will continue with arbitration tomorrow. The Federation wants the Mount Thorley workers reinstated, but how likely is that to happen?
Well, I think that that'll be the resolution of the dispute eventually, that those people terminated will have to be re-employed.
Travel all over the countryside. Ask
People
the
see us as the
Leyland,
guy
ask
next
the
door, they
Leyland.
see us
Travel
as
all
being
over the
like
countryside.
them, they
Ask
look
the
at what we do,
Leyland
they think we could do that, and I think that works, because they say, well, they're not
Whatever
actors,
it
they're
is that
just
you
real
wanted to
people.
see. Ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland, no matter what.
First, there was the ambitious cultural and performing arts complex proposed for Spears Point Park. Lake Macquarie Council attracted $1 million in bicentennial funding for that project, which was predicted to cost more than $3 million to build. Local council elections saw a flurry of independents take over the once Labor-controlled body with a pledge to axe the plan. Well, they did that in October last year. Since then, a number of other bicentennial projects have been floated, including a park for Green Point, a marine study centre on the banks of Swansea Channel, and a beach restoration project. All but the last have been scrapped. Then there was the major embarrassment, the Lake Spectacular, which proved to be anything but, rather a financial flop, running up a deficit of more than $75,000. Macquarie Mayor Ivan Welsh says council could have done more.
Well, I think ratepayers will be happy with the fact that we didn't waste their money on other projects, which we could have done, and we've opted to do a project, which is our project for the bicentenary. We could have gone ahead with the entertainment centre, as you've mentioned, and it would have cost, I can assure you, lots more money.
Are you disappointed more wasn't done?
Yes, I am. I'm disappointed that we didn't do Green Point. And if we had have gone ahead with the Green Point project, then I don't think we'd have the little problem that we've got now.
What do you think the stumbling block's been? Has it been your own Bicentennial committee?
Well, I wouldn't say they were a stumbling block because they're a hard-working committee. They worked very hard for all the projects that they were into, but I believe that they may have been possibly peeved with me at the time and decided to go for other projects rather than something that I chose.
State authorities, and then eventually, of course, once it's completed, it will become.
Swiftwings is a Japanese bulk carrier which is loading wheat bound for Bangladesh. It actually uses the wind as an auxiliary engine. The secret lies in these huge sails made from cloth stretched over a steel frame. A computer sets the sails according to wind speed and direction, saving the vessel up to 20% in fuel costs. Swiftwings was born during 1984 when oil prices were still high. Now that the fossil fuel is cheaper to burn, designers have returned to more traditional methods of powering ocean-going vessels. Meanwhile, under sail of a different kind, maxi yacht Windward Passage sailed into Newcastle today after a string of international victories. The crew is resting for a few days in preparation for the biggest challenge yet, the Sydney to Hobart.
Did it offer you any comfort? Yes, much comfort, yes. To know that he was being cared for, looked after, and he had this special place all for himself, and I could come and visit.
Is there any hope for people that have ME as far as some sort of medical cure?
Well, at the moment there isn't, and there won't be a cure until we know more about the basic cause of the disease.
Does that mean that at this stage the medical profession is reasonably ignorant about what causes ME?
Oh yes, very much so. We don't know the mechanisms involved. We think that it's caused by or precipitated by viral infections or other types of bacterial infection, and then that it subsequently affects the immune system. But why people get fatigued and what causes this to continue and be profound and prolonged is unknown.
Sonia Lawson lives at Saratoga on the Central Coast. She can only walk with a shuffle for a few minutes a day. Most of the time she's confined to her bed or this sofa in the living room. Chronic fatigue syndrome is a complaint which has dogged Sonia's life for a long time, but in the past 6 years has got progressively worse.
It's like my muscles are lead. It's like when you get the fatigue, if you keep going, it's as though they don't feel like normal arms and legs. They just feel as though you've got these things attached to you that are like lead. And then the pain sets in, and my muscles go into spasm, and they actually twitch. You can see them twitching.
Dr Donohoe, thanks for joining us. I understand you've recently conducted tests, blood tests, on sufferers of chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, what did you find?
Well, we found, to our surprise, that there are very high levels if you compare the chemical levels in these people's blood with those of the United States.
High levels of what? Toxicity?
Well, high levels of toxic chemicals generally. What we looked at were initially pesticides, the well-known ones like DDT, the organochlorine group of chemicals, which are long-living chemicals in people's blood, in their bodies. They stay many, many years. And there's been a suspicion that these could cause immune suppression in this type of syndrome for a long while. That was the first occasion. When we found the very high levels of those chemicals, we went back on the second occasion and paid more attention to a broader range of chemicals like petrochemical derivatives, solvents, PCBs, things that are also known to cause immune suppression. And we found the same thing there, quite high levels when you compare us to the United States.
Now, does that mean that we're being exposed to more chemicals here on the East Coast and in the Central Coast and here in the Hunter Valley?
It's hard to say. At the moment, basically we've looked at unwell people, and as any medical researcher will tell you, choosing unwell people as your study group automatically biases the results. There are two possibilities. One possibility is that all of us as a representative group on the East Coast of Australia are exposed to high levels of these chemicals, and that all this is reflecting is the high level of exposure. The other possible explanation is that a small group of people, namely the people who suffer from this syndrome, are completely unable to clear the chemicals from their blood. And so if they're unable to clear it, they're left with very high levels, and this may contribute to their illness.
But aren't some of these chemicals, haven't they already been banned for some time?
Well, yes. The difficult part to explain is that there's not been thought to be any problem in Australia, and part of the shock that we got when we took these bloods was that we found that the levels of chemicals were totally unexpected to ourselves, to the Americans, to anybody who's looked at the results. Hexachlorobenzene, DDTs, they've been banned chemicals for a while, and they're known cancer-causing agents. They should be banned as well.
Why did you take these blood samples to the United States? Why not conduct these tests in pathological laboratories in Australia?
That's a good question. We've been asked that over and over. The simple answer is that when we went to find out what the average results were for Australians, to compare them to the Americans, we could find nowhere where these studies have been done. And of course, when you go to a laboratory, you need to compare your test group against another group. And we could find no comparison group in Australia. To our knowledge, no one has gone through this and done these studies on anyone in Australia before. So we have no comparison, whereas the Americans have been doing this for over a decade. We have a very good idea of what's normal, so-called normal, in the American population.
So you have a benchmark on what is perhaps a safe and acceptable level.
That's correct, and yet it's what we would all think of as quite a polluted benchmark. I think most Australians would tend to think of their American counterparts as being more polluted and more exposed to these toxic chemicals than we are. But in fact, it may turn out to be exactly the reverse.
Does this give evidence for perhaps a possible cause for ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, do you think?
Well, it's a very complicated illness. I think it'd be a brave person to stand up and say, what is the cause for this? I think what we're looking for is contributing factors, things which set the stage for the immune suppression and the viruses and the problems which subsequently occur. But we've all known for a long time that there has not been so far pushed any simple cause, any simple reason why the immune suppression, which is the hallmark of this disease, should happen. And it has been known for a long while that these chemicals are capable of causing this kind of immune suppression.
Now, you work on the Central Coast.
That's correct, yeah.
On this program a little while ago, we highlighted the fact that the Central Coast seems to have a higher degree of this disease occurring. Is there any connection between chemical concentrations on the Central Coast and ME?
We've looked in the bloods of people on the Central Coast. A fair proportion, because of my interest in this and because I'm part of this study, has been from people on the Central Coast and from the Hunter region generally. And we have noticed that there are higher levels of some of these chemicals in these people, slightly higher than people from the rest of the areas around Australia, but not significantly so. There's just a tendency to believe that PCBs, HCB and the DDT type chemicals may be higher. But basically I think we're seeing a problem of a class of people, a group of people who are having a lot of problems with these chemicals, not just one area.
Is there a possibility that because of their sensitivity they could be highlighting us to the fact that there are more of these toxic chemicals in our environment than is perhaps healthy for people that don't suffer ME?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that that's the track that we're starting to move along with our research now, is to assume that these people are very sensitive to the chemicals and that these levels of chemicals, which may affect other people not very much, are affecting these people a great deal. We have a good model to go on, asthmatics, for example, who respond very, very acutely to pollens and dust mite, whereas it may not worry 99% of the population or 95% of the population. And we think that what we're seeing is there's a group of people very sensitive to the chemicals who, after a long time of exposure, start to be unable to get rid of the chemicals from their body. And then the possibility is that it simply accumulates, and what we're seeing now is an accumulation of these chemicals which prevents these people from getting well.
How far have you gone with this? Have you been able to pinpoint any particular factor in these areas that could perhaps explain these high levels of chemicals?
No, in truth, the 6 of us that got involved in this study are all clinicians. Our concern was with unwell people who were unable to be got better from any of the methods that we knew and just remained unwell. What we've done is I think we've raised more questions than we ever imagined we would raise. We're raising now the questions of where do the chemicals come from, how can they be there without anyone knowing about it, especially in these high concentrations in people's blood. And so we now see that there's a point in moving forward from here, doing the testing, maybe doing the studies on the normal population, finding out if that's reflecting the same thing that we found, and certainly starting what would be a political process of trying to find just where these dangerous chemicals come from, because there is no safe level of any of the chemicals that we're talking about.